All right. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm Jennifer Pristina. I'm head of marketing for Productable. So welcome to you all. As most of you probably already know, Productable is the cyber startup behind Project Holodeck. So we are working directly with the SAF MG team to help you all accelerate change. Productable has a patent pending methodology inside our software that was actually designed specifically for this purpose, to empower innovators and innovation leaders to move faster. So at this point, we've only rolled out a small piece of our technology, but in the coming months, we're going to launch some pretty powerful capabilities that we're excited to share with you all at some point. So to further kind of empower innovators like yourself, we decided to start our Quick Talk series with the invisible enemies of innovation, because these are challenges that come up so often in our work with Air Force and corporations as well. And these enemies are also a big reason why our founder started Productable in the first place. So as you can see on your screen here, we have one hole to fill, and we would love to get your ideas on what our last enemy should be. So if you have any thoughts around this topic, any challenges that your team has faced personally, please feel free to throw those ideas in the chat kind of at any point during the webinar. So yeah, I'd like to introduce you to Rachel Conn. She is the founder and CEO of Productable, and her experience with innovation it runs so deep. She's been a consultant for dozens of corporations. She was head of innovation for the Mark Cuban, and she also did research with MIT on innovation process. So figuring out what works, why innovation often fails, and the valley of death was part of that research. So with that, I'll hand the floor over to Rachel so she can tell you about some of the most effective ways she has found to resolve the valley.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that great introduction. Hi, everyone. As Jennifer mentioned, I've experienced these enemies of innovation more times than I can count in my career, and not having a way to tackle these enemies head on is really what got me started on building Productable. So as we're talking about today, enemy number one, valley of death. The valley of death is places where all of these awesome ideas go to die. And it's where a lot of solutions get the support to get started, but then they die when it comes to really making them happen. This really happens from two different reasons. One, poor resource planning. So leaders spending all their money getting the idea started, and then they don't have a place to fund the projects or a way to move them forward. And then it's also poor process planning on the innovators. The innovators don't think about what they're going to need next to succeed. And so to tell you a little bit more of my personal story of Valley of Death, I was working at a really big company, a manufacturing facility that you've probably heard of. And essentially, we were working on building out, we were in this huge manufacturing facility, and a lot of people were putting the wrong chemical into the machine, and it was causing $10 million of ruined product on the inside of the machine. It happened a number of times, and it cost the company $50 million a year, basically in all of this misplaced product or misplaced chemical. So I created a prototype that solved it. I hacked together some labels, put together some signs that would make it so much harder for this mix up to happen. And we tested it for a few months and nobody made any mistakes. It was amazing. So then I started pitching the solution. Hey, instead of doing this kind of crappy job of labels that I put together, we could put it together nicely, it could be sustainable, and we'd stop losing $10 million all the time. And so I'm looking, and fun fact, nobody really cared. It didn't happen. I took down my signs. Nobody was really bought into this idea of fixing our $10 million problem. It was pretty crazy. Too many silos, too much politics. It just wasn't going to happen. So let me tell you my next valley of death experience. I was an innovation consultant. We worked with all these large organizations, helping them think about new products, improve their processes, reduce their costs. It was this really exciting opportunity to work with these old industrial companies that had billions of dollars at stake with bad products and bad process. And we helped them prototype new solutions with startups and new technology that could help them solve all of their problems. And we looked for people in the business to help invest in these new solutions so that we could actually create the impact that we knew that these products were capable of. Well, probably not surprising to tell you that in general, these often failed. No one cared. It didn't happen. It was just really, really hard to get anyone to buy into early stage ideas. And it was just like we had wasted a bunch of our time. It was really, really painful. And so this sucks. And I just had to see how to do things differently. And I learned my answer while working for Mark Cuban and while working with Silicon Valley. And serial entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs that have learned to play the game over and over again, they have a trick to this. And essentially, here's how it goes. So the serial entrepreneur pitches to find who cares and then builds it with them as partners. So they see the problem, the big problem that needs to be solved. And then the entrepreneur looks for an investor to give them the resources they need to develop their idea. They may have to get a lot of no's to get a yes, but when they finally get that yes, they build a prototype with that investor's feedback in mind. Now we're going to break this down a little bit in just a little bit, so bear with me. But essentially, again, there's success here because they're already bought into this idea and it helps them create the scalability with their partner. So the big difference between these, again, is the broken way is problem, prototype, solution, and then fail. But really that winning way is problem, pitch it, prototype, succeed. So how innovation works in the Air Force is very similar to big corporations. You build your prototype and then pitch to find a resource. The Air Force and pretty much every big corporation in America needs to start acting like a startup. First, you pitch your idea, then you build your prototype. Not only does this resolve the valley of death, but it accelerates the innovation process. So for the entrepreneur, beginning with the end in mind is going to save you so much time and headache. So when we break this down into the successful way, if you have a problem and you want to solve it and an idea of how you want to solve it, before you build anything, pretend you built your solution. Let's call this X. And pretend your prototype X was awesome. You nailed it. Everything went great. Make a presentation of your final findings and think about what you'd want to do after you've had this awesome prototype and you want to sell everyone on it. So let's call this Y. So then you get to set it up as a pitch. If I build my solution X, would you give me the resources to do Y? Now, here's the thing. Most of the time, the answer is going to be no. But in the world where you had already built X and then tried to find people, you'd be in a world of frustration. But now instead, you have optionality. You can decide to work with the person who said no, tweak your X solution, tweak your Y solution to get it right with them. You could decide to go with somebody else and keep finding those right partners and right people to grow with. Or maybe you find out that when you ask enough people, the problem that you thought was right is actually not really a problem worth solving, and you're saving yourself some heartache. So instead of diving into a single direction of solving a problem, you actually learned that it wasn't really worth pursuing. And that's a great learning too. So when you're talking to all of these different types of stakeholders and thinking about your pitch, can you give me if I build X, will you give me the resources to build Y? It's built up of three components. First, you want to define the problem. Who has the problem? What's the scale of it? Thinking about how your solution fits into that and how you think your solution is going to solve that problem. Then you go into that ask, if I build X, will you give me the resources to build Y? Then see how they can help and what they think needs adjustment. Keeping it really simple at this level is going to help you streamline all of your efforts, figure out what the real problem is, what you really should be building, and help you build a team of people around your idea so that you actually can bring scale to it. Now, for the investors, groups that fund innovation, I'm talking to you. So imagine a world where your projects don't get stuck. It can happen, but it's going to take some strategic resource planning on your part. So we too also have to begin with the end in mind. So there's a way that a lot of large organizations set their money all up front. And this is so that as many ideas as possible get funded. But when that happens, it actually creates some problems, because when the ideas prove themselves, they should be able to get more money on their merit. Well, unfortunately, these ideas are often so early, they can't prove themselves on the merit that's at a comfortable place of saying yes. There's too much risk, so they get a lot of maybes. Then from a money perspective, there's no money set aside for that riskier mid-stage effort. So all of the ideas that are funded at an early stage end up reaching a bottleneck and just sitting in the pipeline. So this leaves all of the ideas sitting at that earliest stage of a development with no support to move forward. And this leaves innovators frustrated with no clear path to scale, and they end up having to beat the system to build their idea. This creates a very negative innovation culture and makes it really difficult to move ideas forward and to be an innovative company. And this is what causes the valley of death. So here's what we have to do to overcome it. Look at where you are on your innovation, on your spending, and look at where you're allocating your budget. Think about the stages of funding you support. Is it early, mid, late stage ideas? And before you even get started funding ideas, you need to think about how you're allocating resources and how you're making decisions. You want to leave room for failure in each of your efforts, so there's room to experiment and find unexpected solutions. This is a webinar all in itself, so feel free to email me if you want to know more about how to make this happen, and I'm more than happy to set up a chat. So in conclusion, innovators, pitch how you'd like to go about building your idea before you build it. It forces you to think about what success looks like, ensures people are bought into your vision of success, and lets you learn from your vision without you actually having to put in the legwork. To get support, you might have to kiss a lot of frogs to get your prince, but that is a lot easier to do pre-prototype than post. Then if you want to scale your idea, you can make sure it's worth pursuing before you throw all of your energy into it. And then investors, think about what it would take for you to say yes to an idea before you see it. Are you making room in your budget for only some solutions to succeed? And are those succeeding solutions going to have more funding to scale? So I could talk about innovation till I'm blue in the face and a lot of these different topics, but I'm happy to just take some questions. That's my soapbox for now, if you will.
Thanks, Rachel. We have a question or more of a concern really in chat. I'll give you a chance to read Dennis's messages, but he's basically saying that it kind of sounds like lip service to make airmen and leaders feel good by sending a false message to the workforce. And, you know, I have to say, Dennis, we're super empathetic to this point of view, because we know, and Rachel knows more than anyone, that that a lot of innovation services and certainly innovation platforms just don't work. And we are really doing our best to be truly different in this arena. But we completely understand kind of where you're coming from. But I'll go ahead and let Rachel kind of address this from her point of view, since she's the real innovation expert on this call.
Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, Dennis, I'm trying to make sure that I'm understanding this. So you said senior management sees a problem one level lower in the food chain, seeks to please the leader by taking a perceived action, reimagining the solution, and accepted by the leader one lower, and then dies on the vine due to lack of emphasis by that one leader. This sounds really political and complicated. Yes. So I'll tell you, like, we're here to make innovation easier. And one of the things that we really want to drive is aligned outcomes across all of these different layers of leadership. And so by setting what success looks like with, let me look back for that slide. Essentially imagining what you would do next and asking for what your next phase of success looks like. Ideally, you should be able to solve one step with one layer up, and then maybe you start incorporating higher levels of leadership as your idea scales. And we really want to make sure that everyone, I'm trying to figure out how to answer your question, that essentially we have the right people bought in before we do the work. And so this is really tricky with the Air Force. I'll tell you that we're figuring it out with you. And I know there's a lot of political challenges. Would it make sense to what you're asking to answer with that by bringing in the stakeholders before we do the work, aligning on what the outcome is that all of those people are looking for, and then moving towards that would help that? Or is there something more specific that you're referring to? And feel free to write back on that one.
And to add to that, I think that, we acknowledge that the Air Force is super complicated and has many, many layers of leadership. And we know that, and are kind of working with SAPMG now to kind of figure that out and make things a lot easier for all the innovators within the Air Force. So feel free, if you have any other questions regarding that, Dennis, to throw them into chat. Otherwise, let's go on. So David has a question.
I love David's question.
I like this question too. So what if you are post-prototype? So Rachel, you addressed the pre-prototype phase, but what if you're post-prototype and stuck in the valley? How do you get out?
How do I get out of here? So it's really the same trick. Now what's happened is, instead of pretend you built it at this phase, it's pretend you scaled it. And imagine what would happen if you scaled it and what you'd want to do after that. And this X and Y can essentially change through all of your phases. And so the trick is, and I'm still trying to find the simplest way to turn this into an ism, but it's not quite there yet. It's essentially that you want to get the people to buy into your idea before you have to ask them for a yes. So whoever is going to be able to give you that next round of money, essentially have them buy into your project now, and make sure that you're creating things that are going to get them to say yes and get them to buy into it. And I know that mid-stage funding is really, really limited in the Air Force, so it's going to be hard to find those stakeholders, but hopefully there's people around you that can help you find some of that mid-stage funding, and then getting them bought into your course to being ready to that, as opposed to building it and then hoping that they will come into it.
So this next question actually kind of goes along with finding those stakeholders. So even in the pre-pitch phase, I think is what this question is referring to. How do you figure out who needs to get involved, or what subject matter experts you need to go to for that kind of first ask?
That's a great question. And so this is part of the challenge of creating something new. It's really, really hard to define what it is and what you need. And maybe the surprising part is you have to actually quarterback that piece a little more yourself than you might expect. And if you even put out a straw man idea of, here's what I think it's going to be like, and I'm going to need security help, I'm going to need access to specific materials, I'm going to need money, I'm going to need X, Y, and Z. The more you can hypothesize what you think your list of things that you need will be, the easier it is for people to give feedback and say, you should talk to this person, or you should connect with this group over here. And so again, the Air Force is really complex. And so I'm not going to pretend to know exactly who you should involve for every scenario. And with our platform, we are hoping to drive more of that kind of intel. But essentially, the more you can push to define your thing and say, this is what it is, the easier it is for everyone to give feedback, iterate, and recommend who you should be talking to.
Great. So I think we have time. Let's try to squeeze in one more question, if that's okay with everyone. John just sent a question through. What is the range of funding usually provided for a prototype?
Oh, that's such a great question. It really, really ranges, because I mean, as you saw with the prototype that I was talking about from my corporate experience, I mean, my prototype was paper from the printer and some tape. And, it didn't really cost anything. There's a lot of solutions that you can build with the prototype out of really simple things like that. There's also prototypes that if you're building something really high tech, like a hypersonic rocket, you might have to prove a different engine model. So it really does depend on what you're building and the problem you're trying to solve. And you want to narrow really at the prototype phase. You want to figure out what your biggest challenges are. What are people going to say is wrong about your idea? What experiments do you need to prove? And simplify them as much as possible so that you can prove them with the lowest amount of money as possible that you're actually solving the thing that they said was impossible. So perhaps you can leverage codeless systems. Perhaps you can leverage a lot of existing things. Personally, I like to think you can do a lot of it for free, but again, like I said, if you're building something completely bold and crazy, it could be a few $100,000s. If you're needing to buy people's time, it could go into millions of dollars if you have to actually buy out your team and have them support you. But I guess my general rule of thumb is, and leaning on Silicon Valley, I would say it's more in the couple hundreds of thousands of dollar range.
Great. All right. Well, it looks like that is all of the questions. Thank you all so much for joining us. This was our first webinar, and we would really love to get any feedback that you have. So please feel free to email me or Rachel, Jennifer@beproductable.com or Rachel@beproductable.com. And we are happy to kind of continue any conversations that you all want to have offline. So we hope you'll join us for our next one. We're going to be talking about it wasn't invented here for our next enemy. So we hope you will join us, and please feel free to reach out at any time if you want to discuss innovation. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.